I decided to do another video, in part because I left things out of the Animorphs video that I had wanted to include, but also I read a bunch of books that I really liked, and it was a theme month, which I sometimes do, mostly around Christmas time and Halloween for obvious reasons, but this month's theme was my birthday, and so I read a bunch of books that that have meaning for me. Some of them I had read before. One of them I had read before. One of them I had been in, and the other two were new, but they were books that well, I'll get into why I read them and why they mean something to me. First, I'll talk about a couple of books that I have not read, starting with this one. The light's not helping there. Okay, there we go. Little Women, which I mentioned in the Animorphs video. I have read Little Women in the past, but I don't consider myself to have read it for a number of reasons. I'm a better reader now than I was then, so that's why I reread some books now, whether I liked them back then or not, so that I have a better sense of if I actually like them or actually dislike them. Also, Little Women, if you remember from the Animorphs, I blame it for never finishing the Animorphs series, and I wasn't necessarily going to read it because I finally finished the Animorphs series. That just happens to have coincided with the news that there's going to be, it's currently in production, a new movie based on the novel, directed by Greta Gerwig, and starring Saoirse Ronan and Emma Watson and a whole bunch of other exciting people. And also, I have on DVD the old version, the older movie. I think it's from the '90s with Winona Ryder, which I really like Winona Ryder. So I'll read the book, I'll watch the DVD. Hopefully, I'll get a chance to watch the newer version. That book I found at a library sale that I recently went to. It was the only book that I went to the sale looking for, and I knew it would be there. And it was the only one that I was going to get, but then I got this one because I found it. And I didn't know that, Victor Hugo, you hear about two books. You hear about Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I really loved, and this one, which I've been avoiding reading for many years because it's very thick. And, but I started reading it, and I'm reading it bit by bit, 5 pages a day until the end of January, first week of February, 10 pages a day, and then from then on, 15 pages a day. And it should take me a few months to get through it. I haven't looked at the last page, the page number on the last page recently, but I have in the past, and I'm pretty sure that 1 and 4 are the first 2 of the 4 numbers at the top of that last page. So it's intimidating, but I want to get it through it. I'm hoping to also read Don Quixote this year, so that'll give you an idea. Same strategy, not like one of the books that I plow through, but like a slow read. And this one, in one of the books that I'm going to talk about, reminded me of, I used to hear when I was taking publishing classes and when I was first started querying agents with my own novels, that I heard stories about agents and editors who would receive the first chapters of classic literature. I don't know why they were sent the first chapters. I don't know what the person was trying to prove. I guess they were trying to prove that if the submission was rejected, it meant that the agent or editor had no taste because they rejected Jane Austen or Charles Dickens, and there's several things wrong with that. It assumes that they didn't just recognize that this wasn't the submitting author's original work, and therefore it could not possibly be. Well, they could represent it. They could get it published. They couldn't represent it, but they could get it published. It's if it's one of those, it's not in copyright, but they're not gonna give the submitting author credit for that, and they probably, if it's a book company, they probably already have their own copyright free version of it. This is the Signet Classic. You can also get the Modern Library edition. You can also get what's that? Oxford World Classics probably has a Little Women. So there's that, but also the first 55 pages of this book have nothing to do with Jean Valjean or Fantine or Javert or Cosette or any of the characters from the musical or any of the movies, except for the bishop who gives Jean Valjean the silver. And so not only is it not a good, just a good thing to do or a sensible thing to do to send the first chapter of a book like this to a literary agent, but the first chapter doesn't really give you a sense of what the book is like, except maybe its style. Also, this one would be a translation, as any English language Les Mis would be. Um, but also, reading Les Mis and then one of the other books, the one by Wilkie Collins, that I read earlier, and it was a book of short stories, but and they all kind of had sections and chapters, so to speak, but they were short stories, and maybe one or two qualify as a novella. But the first chapters were often introductory. Like the first parts of Wuthering Heights center around a character who has nothing to do with any of the parts that anyone cares about from Wuthering Heights, because it's a character who becomes a guest in Heathcliff's house, and then one of the maids ends up telling him the story of Heathcliff and Catherine and everyone else, um, not representative of the story. And so, which is perhaps a problem with the idea of you send a first chapter and that's supposed to get the people interested. Um, it doesn't necessarily, the books that we worship most, that's not always the case, that it's the most interesting, most representative part of the book. But I guess they did things differently back then anyway. Another book, this is the book that I'm about to start reading, and that is, I've been meaning to read it for a long time, especially Richard Adams died last year, I think it was, and whenever an author dies, that's my cue to, if I haven't yet, start reading their work. So Watership Down, also there's that new Netflix version, and dramatic adaptations are often a big part of my reasoning for wanting to read something. So Watership Down, I will finally read. And I think more on Animorphs later, as I said, the stuff I forgot. So let's jump into, this is the first book that I read when I got back to New York, The Blue Bear. I think it was between freshman and sophomore year of college, I Googled Blue Bear. I don't know why. And I got pictures, and some of them were of blue bear sculptures. There's one where bear is looking out on the, or giant blue bear pressed up against looking in a window, something like that. Probably a temporary piece of public art. But then there was a picture that actually looked like a bear in nature, and it was blue. And I believe that it was this picture, which you can tell probably a little bit. And if not, just Google Glacier Bear. You'll probably find my Atlas Obscura entry on it, on them, or you'll find the Wikipedia entry. You'll just find these pictures, and probably this picture as well. This one down, I'll hide the dead bear there. This picture here was taken by the author of this book. Blue bears exist, and since my favorite animal is the bear, and my favorite color is the blue bear is the perfect animal, as far as I'm concerned. I love all bears equally, but the blue bear is the perfect animal. And in that Google search, I found out about this book, and it just happened to be at my local Barnes & Noble. And I bought it and read it, and again, I wasn't a very good reader back then, so for years I've thought, well, I'll write a one-man show, or I will play Lynn Schooler, and I will talk mostly about glacier bears. And the book is about in large part, about the quest to find glacier bears and take a picture of them. They're very, very rare, in part because a glacier bear is just a black bear that has the right genes to have blue or bluish or blue-looking fur. And that also means they can interbreed with black bears and with other varieties of black bears. Not all black bears are black. That's just the overall category of that size and shape of bear. Some of them are white, and those are called spirit bears, and some of them are light brown. I forget if they have a special name. But the book is mostly about the author's relationship with, let me make sure I get the name right, Michio Hoshino, a Japanese nature photographer, who at first he's hired, Lynn Schooler is hired to take uh, Michio around so that he can photograph Alaska. And then on that trip, they find out about blue bears, and that becomes a mutual goal to find one and photograph one. And but the book is mostly about that relationship and how it kind of opened him up for a variety of reasons, for health reasons, and other reasons. Lynn was a loner, and that's part of the reason why he decided to make his life as living on a boat and guiding people around Alaska. Um, but his relationship here kind of opened him up to other people, made him more excited about experiencing other people, and that's what most of it's about. Still would make a great one-man show. I am probably a bit young to play the character, and I didn't go into the book understanding properly what the book was about, so I'm not going to do it yet, but I also thought a great dramatic movie, perhaps potentially Oscar-worthy dramatic movie. Um, Maybe something else that I can write when I get into writing movies. I've gotten into writing most other things. Um, so, Blue Bears, perfect animal. Been meaning to reread that book for a while, and I haven't in part because, as with Les Mis, although not to that extent, uh, I like to plan out my reading of books, and which often involves knowing how many pages they are. And I started reading that book without looking this past time without looking at how many pages, and I decided to make that a New Year's resolution of sorts. Also, being my birthday month, a New Age resolution, not that kind of New Age. Um, so I'm trying to go through books without looking, and I can tell from kind of how thick they are, whether they're going to take a while, they're going to take approximately a week or a couple of weeks, depending on my rate of reading. But mostly I've not been looking, and I think that's helped. That's another reason why I'm finally going to read this one. And after The Blue Bear, I read this book of short stories by Wilkie Collins. Now, Wilkie Collins is, like Victor Hugo, mostly famous for two books, The Moonstone and The Woman in White. But I've read other novels by him. I really like him. Woman in White is my favorite classic novel. And I'd read a couple of these short stories, and I remembered one of them, but I hadn't read the full book, and so I decided to read the full book. And a lot of great stories, and including one with a murderous bed, and there was a ghost in one. It was very interesting, and the picture, which is called, well, it's a French title. The translation on the back of the book here says "The Voyager Above a Sea of Clouds." This is part of a painting, The Voyager Above a Sea of Clouds, and it is the same image used on the cover of my dad's copy of Frankenstein, which is the one that I've read now. I've read it twice. In one time, he read it to me when I was very young. That was the bedtime story sort of thing that we had. And so I'm very amused, and I love the idea of classic paintings being the covers of classic books, because if you got a classic book, you know you're going to get some great literature, but subliminally you are also getting great art, and so I love that combination. Not much to say about the individual stories. There was the ghost in the one, the murderous bed. A lot of them have to do. There's one. Which one was it? See if I can remember which one it was. It was either The Diary of Anne Rodway or The Lady of Glenwith Grange. I should have written down which. Seemed kind of like a forerunner to The Woman in White, because it's about an older sister, younger sister relationship. The younger sister has a great marital prospect who may not be who he claims to be. And that's essentially The Woman in White. Plus there's more to the story, and there's more to The Woman in White. But, and I believe, I forget which one came first, but below the video is going to be links to my blog posts about each of these books, and if you go to the blog post, I believe I do say which one came first. Another thing I should have written down, perhaps. I did write down the things about Animorphs that I wanted to remember, because I didn't remember them last time, so now I will learn this lesson, like I learned that lesson from that video, I will learn this lesson. It's not just Animorphs that I have to write things down about to remember. This is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, And you may not have heard of her, but if you are a woman, you definitely benefit from her existence because she, and Susan B. Anthony, but Susan B. Anthony later, she was the spearhead of the movement to get women the right to vote and so many other rights, including rights to divorce and concerning divorce. A woman could get a divorce and not be completely bereft of everything. She wouldn't lose everything just because when she married a man, everything that she owned became the man's. If she unmarries the man, she can get stuff back. Um, I am writing a musical about her and Susan B. Anthony, which is why I have this book. I have a bunch of other books over there about her and Susan, and including their own works. Um, she, I first learned of her around the same time I learned about the Blue Bear. I think it was between freshman and sophomore year of college, taking a summer course at a local college so I could get my American history lesson requirement out of the way. And I saw the Ken Burns documentary, Not for Ourselves Alone. And I grew up in Rochester. I knew who Susan B. Anthony was. I'd been to her house. I'd drawn her house and won some kind of award for drawing her house at some kind of special celebration anniversary. I forget the details. I was in 5th grade. And I knew that Susan B. Anthony was the woman who got women the right to vote. I didn't know that Elizabeth Cady Stanton and many other women also were involved, and that Elizabeth Cady Stanton, in fact, was one of the people who started it, and one of the driving forces. This is not a very long book, and I'm not going to keep it as I have many Elizabeth Cady Stanton things, because it's mostly stuff I already knew. It was just a nice refresher, and it inspired me to include more things in the musical. It's just good to get a fresh perspective every so often, but I only have so much room to keep books, and I have a lot of books about Stanton. And so I'm gonna, but ideally, since it's a musical and I don't write music, I would like to give this to the woman who I end up collaborating with, because I can't write music. I'm looking for a woman who writes music to, and if that's you, there's contact information probably down there. You can get in touch. But I will give you this book as your primer on Elizabeth Cady Stanton. That is, if you get to me before I try to sell it to a used bookstore or donate it to my local library. Yeah, there was one particular part, well, two things that stood out as far as the ideas that I got. One was that I have Susan B. Anthony singing a kind of introductory "I'm Susan B. Anthony" song. This is where I'm coming from. I'm Susan B. Anthony, and it's never really been my favorite part. It's kind of awkward. There are clever parts to it, but I also had, because Susan B. Anthony never married, never had kids. Elizabeth Cady Stanton did marry and had a lot of kids, and that became a problem when she also was trying to run the women's suffrage movement. So on occasion, Susan B. Anthony would babysit her kids while she wrote the speeches, because Susan B. Anthony didn't like to write speeches. She liked to deliver speeches, and that's one of the reasons why they made such a great team. So Susan B. Anthony's first song will be a song about babysitting, which is funny, because that's not how people view Susan B. Anthony, in part because she was depicted as a witch-like figure since she came on the scene, but also all historical figures kind of get, like, you wouldn't imagine George Washington or Abraham Lincoln as a babysitter. But Lincoln had kids. He interacted with his kids. Washington married a woman who already had kids. I forget how old they were at the time, but he played a part in raising them. So it's the softer, realer side of the historical figure in Susan B. Anthony. So Susan B. Anthony, she's going to have other songs. She's got a great song about when she goes and votes illegally. But, and I call them songs even though they are just words. I have melodies in my head, but I'm not sure that I didn't get those melodies from elsewhere. So I'm looking for someone to write this with. So Susan B. Anthony, babysitting song. And also, in one part of the book, it is concentrated on that Elizabeth Cady Stanton would speak dismissively about other races the way that everyone did back then. she maybe meant it a little bit less because she was also an abolitionist, but um, I don't want my musical to be um, the one that whitewashes Elizabeth Cady Stanton, makes her the hero of all things, as she kind of is in her memoir, 80 Years and More. It's going to show her rough edges, because without the rough edges, she wouldn't have been as effective as she was. Um, but some of those rough edges, I wish I didn't have to depict. I do plan to depict them. Specifically, her use of a racial slur is not the one you're probably thinking of. Um, when, well, on multiple occasions, but specifically when the the Constitution was being amended to give black men the right to vote, but not black women, and she was, or white women, any women. She was understandably upset by that. Um, but she can be your hero, and you can represent your heroes. You should represent them accurately. It's a play that I did in high school, freshman year of high school. My second ever straight play. I'd done a couple of musicals in middle school, and it's a murder mystery, mystery comedy. It's about murder mystery writers all get together. They're supposed to write the ultimate murder mystery, I guess, TV show. It takes place 60s or 70s, somewhere in there, and they are the murder mystery writers of yore. All of their styles are out of fashion, and the things that they do have been done to death. And so they're supposed to create something new by working together. And so all of their styles kind of get a parody treatment. And my part was I was one of the characters created by one of those characters to demonstrate what they do. And it's a very fun play. And I don't know, it doesn't. I don't believe it ever really had a Broadway run, or even necessarily a New York run. But let's see. Here are the tickets from when I was in it. I don't think that gives any information that it shouldn't give on the internet. Had its first performance at the Dorset Playhouse in Dorset, Vermont. And I think it's mostly a community theater type thing, or hopefully plenty of high schools. It's really funny, fun to revisit. Some faces of my fellow students who I was in it with came back right away. In fact, had never left me. Some came back and adjusted themselves to the parts that they actually played as I read. And then one who I completely didn't expect, I thought, that role was played by that person, but that person I don't associate with the drama stuff that we did, but I swear it was her. And so I reached out to her on Facebook, and she confirmed that it was her. So that's that's one of the reasons it was fun to revisit. Of the straight plays that I did, this is the one that I was most eager to revisit because it was the most fun to do. Even though I had such a small part, it was fun to watch and to learn, and even reading it now and knowing about how tropes are overused in books, and styles they go in and out of fashion. They influence the people who are doing murder mysteries now, and other kinds of movies now. It was very interesting to read for that reason. And I think the next one that I will revisit is Antigone. That was my very first one, the fall. This was the spring play, that was the fall play, with a teacher who I only had for 1 year because he moved to another school in another state, but he definitely left his mark because he introduced me to doing straight drama, and a lot of the books that I read in his class are books that to this day I know the importance of, and I'm a better reader and more well-rounded person for having been introduced to them at that time. This book, I wasn't sure if I was going to finish it before I did the video, but but I did, and so here it is. The first, well, not the first, I found out was when I was looking up the Dinotopia series. The first of the tiny paperback serials of the Dinotopia. Apparently, Dinotopia started with a big picture book, and I have the big picture book sequel to that big picture book, and I have 4 of these, and also one apparently written for adults from the same world, Dinotopia. I haven't read the original Utopia, or maybe I did in college and I've forgotten. But I've read Herland, for instance, which is an all-woman utopia, and a couple of others that might qualify as utopias. But Dinotopia, um, I have the 4. I was going to keep them all because I only have the 4, and like the Animorphs books, can't really find them very easily anymore. I have since decided that this, since it's the one that I read back then and that I was eager to reread, I was going to be my representative keeper, and then I would get rid of the others. And now that I've reread it, I'm not so sure I'm going to necessarily keep it, because it's not Animorphs. And it's interesting. It's interesting that there's an island society of dinosaurs. I'll get better at holding the book in the frame if I do it on this side. It's interesting that there's a dinosaur island utopia where the dinosaurs have evolved intellects and they've built a society, and people get washed up on shore thanks to very helpful dolphins. But it's in the opening chapters, it kind of has a weird time jump, and the characters kind of go back and forth without the nuance that they do with Animorphs. And the Animorphs books are not that complicated because they're for the same age group, but they're more complex, nuanced, and so not necessarily going to even keep this one, but I'm going to keep it for a while. It's not going right on the outgoing books shelf. It was interesting, although when inevitably the Tyrannosaurus Rex becomes relevant, I did look up when T-Rexes were discovered, and the book opens in 1863. And yes, on Dinosaur Island, they would have learned about T-Rexes, but when the T-Rex comes up in the context, the characters who wouldn't necessarily have known about T-Rexes before learning about them from the other dinosaurs seem to have the expectations that we would have if we went to a dinosaur island now, having seen the Jurassic Park movie, which I did on Sunday for the most recent time. I've seen it a bunch of times, but they had expectations that the readers would have about meeting a T-Rex, not necessarily expectations that 19th century sailors who washed up on a dinosaur island would have about the potential for meeting a T-Rex. I really like flying things. It's one of the reasons I like Jurassic Park 3, because of the flying dinosaur sequence. And I like the relationship with the skybacks, which is a fictionalized version of a real dinosaur, I think is what I came away with. I'm not sure if it was a real dinosaur. It seems that there was plenty of real dinosaurs that resembled, that flew and that looked rather like that. I think that a skybax is a fictionalized version of those dinosaurs. But the other dinosaurs that are mentioned in the book seem to have existed. So I have 4 because I bought the one that looked most interesting. They don't have numbers on the spines, but somehow I found out, maybe it's listed inside, I found out the order that they come in, and I thought that they were sequential, what's the word that I used when I was talking about, I read the Animorphs books, it begins with a C. I forget what the word is, but that I thought that it was the same characters that followed through the books had to be in a certain order in order to understand the story, and they don't. They're each independent stories, and so, but that's why I had number 4, and so I got the first 3, and I read the first one, and then I didn't read any more. I guess in part because I wasn't as interested. But the covers are all beautiful, and dinosaurs are very interesting, especially to me back then. probably to everyone when they're kids and they first start learning about dinosaurs, it might have become like the Animorphs, and I would have gotten one every month when they came out for however long they came out. Then again, this was also probably around the time that I read Little Women, so who knows how long that would have lasted. So now I wrote down stuff to talk about that I forgot to talk about, Animorphs. And I have a couple of, these are my roommate's copies because I left my 60 plus Animorphs books up in Rochester. I just wanted to say a few more things about, I'll start with Rachel. Because Rachel is often described in the book by all the characters as beautiful, as untouched by anything around her. No matter what she's been through, she always comes off looking flawless. And I don't know what I thought. I maybe thought that was weird as a kid, but rereading it now, whenever that came up, I was like, oh, she's K.A. Applegate or whoever the ghostwriter was at the time, or her husband. They're making fun of the fact that women in action movies, think Wonder Woman for a most recent example, or Scarlett Johansson in the Avengers. They always, like, the men are bloody and bruised after a battle. The women always look like their hair has just been done, even if they've been through battle. And that is a common trope that's been through. Women are not allowed to look messy, even when they've been messed up in an action movie. Laura Dern in Jurassic Park, she's got more scratches on her than most, but she doesn't have the damage that Sam Neill does. Sam Neill? Yeah, I think it's Sam Neill. Dr. Grant. So that's I just thought that was an interesting running joke that, and it's another, like so many of the Animorphs books, another reference to classic science fiction and what it's done with its characters. So yes, I don't know if that was the intent, but it seems the intent because it is ridiculous. It is a ridiculous thing, and the characters seem to find it ridiculous as well whenever they say, now Rachel looked flawless, as usual. Rachel, and then a bit more about Cassie, which if you watched the Animorphs video, you know she's my favorite Animorph. She's the one that I would want to raise if I had a kid, if one of the Animorphs was going to be my kid, but like I said, I'd probably end up with Rachel. But Cassie, and I'm using this book in particular, not only because the cover is one of the covers that just pops, the purple against the green, the bright orange there. Again, I think I said this in the other video, these covers are somewhat reminiscent of classic science fiction covers, or not classic science fiction necessarily, but the brightly colored covers that like on your Flash Gordon, like ridiculous but beautiful in their way, kind of tacky covers, and these covers resemble that. But Cassie, I wanted to mention because, and this cover in particular, this was the book where I kind of turned the corner on Cassie and thought, well, she's more than just a tree hugger, peaceful Animorph who doesn't want to fight but does it necessarily. She's really good at what she does. She's a decidedly non-athletic human, but she turns into a horse in this book, and I forget exactly why, but for some reason it is crucial that she enters a horse race, and she wins the race. And she's very excited about winning the race. She's like, I never win at sports. And so that's an amusing thing. Also in this book, her parents literally say, yeah, she's all right. And that was also the first clue that I kind of had, that even the books are saying she's not going to be as affected by these events as the others are. There's something about her that she's going to keep her sanity more so than the others. So yeah, also in this book, and I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to say this out loud, but she, when they're all horses and they're trying to fool the Yeerks into thinking they're real horses, she poops. And Visser 3 laughs at either the natural actions of a horse or the audacity of an Andalite, because he thinks that she's an Andalite, who would do that, who would go to that extent just to convince him that she's a real horse. and I think it's not the only time that Cassie uses poop against the Yeerks for whatever reason. And so that is, it's on the surface a somewhat disgusting thing, but it also makes a lot of sense, and is probably one of the more effective hiding strategies that they use. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about the ending of Animorphs. I think I mentioned it um, in the other video, but I didn't mention my feelings about it. And the only reason I want to mention my feelings about it is because apparently I knew the ending was a big deal to fans from just things that I'd heard, not just the death, but the kind of open-endedness of it. And as I was reading the final book, as I was reading the second to last book, um, I kind of knew going in, okay, so there's kind of wrapping things up in the second to last book. And so the last book is in large part about their post-Yeerk War lives and how they each handle the war being over, how they each handle their fame, and then it goes into a new sort of mission against a new sort of villain. And all along the book, and the one who dies, and this is the spoiler, so I'm saying spoiler now. I don't like to say spoiler, but I feel I should. So maybe the next minute or so, skip a minute ahead. It's Rachel. And her death is for a very specific reason, and it becomes necessary because of the betrayal of another character. Not a fatal betrayal, but a meaningful one. And I knew that Rachel was the one who dies, and I thought, well, it'll be in a blaze of glory, and because she's the warrior princess type, and it was a mess, and it was chaotic. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, this is not what I expected. But if it were what I expected, if it weren't this, if it weren't messy and chaotic, and only just barely achieved what it was supposed to achieve, it wouldn't be Rachel. And so, and that's kind of the theme of the rest of the book, and why, as I was going through the last book and thinking, oh, I hope this happens, I hope this happens, I hope Cassie is involved here, and then none of my expectations happened. I wish the book had ended differently, but that's because I wish that I'd written the book. The way that it ended is the way that Catherine Applegate wanted it to end. It's her world, and I'm glad that it didn't do what I did, because I could come up with what I did. I couldn't come up with what she did. Hopefully one day I will be capable of that. But and I specifically wanted to talk about it because of late, with reboots and sequels and remakes to classic movies, I often hear the words "ruined my childhood" associated with The Last Jedi, which I really liked, with the all-female Ghostbusters, which I really liked, and with just about everything. And so that ending would have been my version of "You ruined my childhood," because I'm rereading these books from my childhood. I never knew the ending. Now I know the ending. You ruined it, but she didn't. I don't feel that way. I don't feel robbed. I feel like I read this book because I loved what she did throughout, and I'm glad that it always was what she did and not what I would have done. And it has its lessons. Throughout reading the books, I thought, is this too much gore? Is this too much violence for kids? And she very specifically wrote in the gore and the violence, which apparently kids can handle. I guess I handled it when I was a kid, because she wanted to, as she says in the postscript for the final book, she wanted to emphasize, this is the cost of war. This is what war is like. Maybe next time we go to war, remember this, and maybe we won't go to war. And we did. The books ended the summer before 9/11, and we've been in very long wars ever since. But that was her message, and that's why she did what she did. I'm glad she did it, and I do not feel that she ruined my childhood. And last thing that I have written down, probably not the last thing that all of these videos will end with a little bit of the Animorphs stuff that I forgot. But I'm focused when I was saying we really need a Netflix TV adaptation. This is almost as long as my other video. I had hoped it would be shorter. But I focused when I was saying it should be a Netflix show or a Hulu show or some show because we have the technology. I focused on the motion capture being essential motion capture technology and face capture technology being essential for having the Animorphs actually able to play, at least to an extent, the animals that they morph into, and being able to make facial expressions that would be their facial expressions on a tiger's face or a gorilla's face. I also like the idea, since they use thought speak, they wouldn't be speaking with the tiger's mouth or the gorilla's mouth. They use thought speak, that you'd have also the charm of movies like Homeward Bound, before we had our animals in movies moving their mouths like humans to speak. Homeward Bound, it's just the expression of the dog, a real dog or a real cat, looking at each other, interacting with nature and whatever else, and the dialogue. Their mouths aren't moving, but we're hearing what they're saying as kind of thought speak to each other, because the humans certainly can't hear it. And so I really like that more than I like seeing animals' mouths moving like humans. And so I like that potential for the Animorphs talking to each other, like birds in formation talking to each other, that sort of thing. I think there's a lot of potential for comedy there. But also, the motion capture could be used for the aliens, especially the humanoid aliens, like the Hork-Bajir specifically, maybe the Taxons, but specifically the Hork-Bajir, which are impressive physical specimen creatures, and they have cool looking fights. At least I assume cool looking. I imagined them in my head. They weren't actually. I couldn't see them from reading, but I could see them in my head. And so you have stunt people, fight people, dressed up in motion capture suits, maybe with a Hork-Bajir head sticking out of their head for reference in the actual filming, and they could choreograph fight scenes, and it would be real, tangible people, actors, performers doing the fighting, but they would then be made to look like Hork-Bajir, but it wouldn't look like a weightless CGI character. And so I think that would be a really cool thing. So to see. And again, there are things that I'm probably forgetting that I will, the next time I do a video for whatever. I'm hoping to do more videos, like I said, and I think I'm finding my way to that. But that's it for this one. So the links in the bottom, in the information below, I will have links to the blog posts of each of the books that I've read, except for Windchaser, because I just finished that, I haven't written about it. And also a link to the Fun with Animorphs titles, in which I wrote a weird little thing that kind of summarizes the Animorphs series, and I use every single word from the Animorphs book titles that's not the word the. So for instance, let me look at it here. The first line is, I was present at the invasion, a visitor during the encounter at which the message of a predator that wanted to capture mankind was delivered by a stranger. So those are the titles: Invasion, Visitor, Encounter, Message, Predator, Capture, and Stranger of the first 7 Animorphs books. And clicking on those words will get you to the blog posts that I wrote about those books. And so that was fun, and I wanted to make that available for people who maybe want to read. If there's anybody who wants to read everything that I wrote about the Animorphs, it's all in one easy thing. And also all of my other social media links will be there, including Netski Cats, which is all videos of all the cats that my family and I have ever had or hosted. So that's going to be that. This is a little bit shorter than my last one. I'll try to make it more brief in the future. But thank you for watching and for reading, and keep reading, and I'm going to keep reading, and we'll have more. Well, we're not chatting exactly right now, but I do chat with people about books, and this can be an interaction if you want to comment with a book that I should read or something like that. But I'm not really good at endings, so I'm just going to say ram the blade ship again.